A government has already accepted that its country is going to disappear. Not in theory, not as a worst-case projection buried in a scientific report that nobody reads. As official policy, they are uploading their nation into the cloud. Every land map, every legal document, every birth record, every court ruling, every cultural archive, every instrument of sovereignty that separates a country from a geographical coordinate, being transferred systematically into digital servers that will exist independently of any physical ground. Because the ground is going away. The government knows it, the science confirms it, and the response of the international community has been so precisely calibrated to protect the interests of the nations responsible, that the only option left was to build a digital ghost of a nation before the ocean finishes taking the original. This is not a story about rising sea levels. We have been told that story. We have seen the footage. We have watched the speeches. We have felt the appropriate amount of concern and then returned to our lives. This is a story about who made this necessary and what they quietly took in exchange for offering to help. The country is Tuvalu, 9 coral islands in the Central Pacific. Total land area, 26 square kilometers, smaller than Manhattan's Central Park. The entire nation, every road, every home, every school, every grave, every government building, all of it fits inside a space most major cities use for a public park. Highest point above sea level, approximately 3 meters. There are no hills to retreat to, no highlands, no interior. Stand at the center of the capital atoll, Funafuti, and you can see the ocean on both sides at once. The land is not simply low, it is a thin biological membrane stretched across the surface of the Pacific. Coral and sand accumulated over millennia, held together by reef structures that took millions of years to build, and that rising ocean temperatures are now dissolving in decades. And here is the number that should end every climate debate that has ever taken place. Tuvalu's share of global carbon dioxide emissions, 0.00032%. Not a rounding error, not a statistical footnote, a moral verdict. The nations whose industrial output created the atmospheric conditions now consuming Tuvalu are documented and named in every major climate report ever published. The United States, China, Russia, Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, Canada, Australia. None of them are losing land. And in November 2023, one of those nations sat down with Tuvalu's Prime Minister and signed a treaty. The world called it a lifeline. We read the actual document. What we found inside changes the entire story. Before we get to the treaty, before we get to the clause that almost nobody reported, we need to understand what is actually being lost. Because the mainstream coverage of Tuvalu has made a consistent mistake. It has treated this place as a victim, as a passive object of forces larger than itself, as somewhere things happen to, instead of somewhere people built something extraordinary. That framing erases 3,000 years of documented human achievement. The story of Tuvalu begins millions of years ago on the floor of the Pacific Ocean. Volcanic systems slowly built mountains upward from the seabed toward the surface. Over immense spans of time, coral reefs grew around those volcanic peaks. Generation after generation, each new layer building upon the last, forming living rings around the islands as the volcanic rock beneath them slowly subsided. Eventually, the volcanoes disappeared beneath the ocean. The coral rings remained, surrounding calm lagoon waters at their centers. What you are looking at is not simply an island. It is the accumulated biological labor of millions of years of marine life, living architecture, built by organisms too small to see with the naked eye, on a timescale that dwarfs anything human civilization has ever constructed. And today, its highest point stands just 3 meters above sea level. 6 coral atolls, 3 reef islands, a total land area smaller than most international airports. No rivers, no streams, no natural freshwater sources. Soil so thin and so saturated with salt that only a handful of crops can survive. By almost every conventional measure of what makes land habitable, this geography should not work. And yet, people have lived here for 3,000 years. The ancestors of the Tuvaluan people arrived from Samoa and Tonga approximately 3,000 years ago. They did not arrive by accident. They came by open ocean canoe, navigating by star patterns, wave rhythms, swell direction, and wind memory across thousands of kilometers of open Pacific, without instruments, without maps, without any guarantee that land even existed where they were sailing. They were searching across one of the most featureless expanses of water on the surface of this planet, and they found it. 9 fragments of coral, almost invisible from any meaningful distance, scattered across an ocean that covers nearly a third of the Earth. And they did not just survive here. They built something. They developed Tuvaluan, a language that exists nowhere else on Earth. A language that carries within its vocabulary and grammar 3,000 years of accumulated knowledge. How to read this specific ocean, navigate these specific currents, understand these specific weather patterns, and harvest these specific reefs. That knowledge is not written in any textbook. It lives inside the language itself. And today, that language lives in the voices of just 11,000 people. Standing on ground the sea is actively reclaiming. The outside world paid little sustained attention to Tuvalu until the 19th century, when British colonial administration arrived and began imposing a system of external governance that Tuvalu's people had no meaningful way to refuse. In 1892, Britain incorporated the islands into the Gilbert and Ellice Islands colony. When that colony moved toward independence, the Tuvaluan Islands separated from the Gilbertese majority through a 1974 referendum, and in 1978, Tuvalu became an independent nation, sovereign, recognized by the United Nations, standing on just 3 meters of coral sand, at precisely the moment the industrial world was beginning to warm the ocean surrounding it. The timing was not coincidental, it was catastrophic. There is a legal concept called liability. The principle is simple. If your actions cause documented, foreseeable harm to another party, you bear responsibility for the consequences. Apply that principle to climate change, and what you get is a case that has never been tried. Not because the evidence is insufficient, but because the nations with the power to design the international legal system ensured that no binding mechanism exists to try it. The evidence itself is not in dispute. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has documented with scientific consensus that global sea levels have risen approximately 20 centimeters since 1900. The rate of that rise has accelerated sharply since the 1990s. And across the low-lying atolls of the Pacific, particularly Polynesia, the measured rate exceeds the global average. The ocean around Tuvalu is not rising at the same pace as the ocean around London or Tokyo. It is rising faster. And the scientific record connecting that rise to the industrial emissions of specific nations is unambiguous. The United States, China, Russia, Germany, the United Kingdom, the nation that colonized Tuvalu before recognizing its independence in 1978, Japan, Canada, Australia, Tuvalu's nearest large neighbor, and one of the world's highest per capita carbon emitters. These nations built their wealth, their infrastructure, their cities, their standards of living, their geopolitical power, all powered by carbon combustion whose atmospheric consequences are now arriving on coral shores that contributed almost nothing to creating them. Tuvalu has made this argument before the world, at the United Nations, in international forums. Its representatives have reduced the mathematics to a sentence that requires no translation. We did not cause this. You did. And the ground beneath our children's feet is disappearing because of it. The response of the international community has been resolutions, conferences, pledges, frameworks, targets, reviews of targets, revised targets, more conferences, and the ocean keeps rising. Tell me in the comments, was this always a consequence destined to fall on a nation too small to stop it? In November 2021, world leaders, climate negotiators, and thousands of observers gathered in Glasgow, Scotland for COP26, the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference. Tuvalu's foreign minister at the time, Simon Kofe, arrived carrying his government's official statement. He did not deliver it from a podium inside the conference center. Instead, he traveled to a reef flat on one of Tuvalu's outer islands. He placed a lectern in shallow water. He put on his suit, his tie, his government-issued shoes, and he walked into the Pacific Ocean until the water reached his knees. And from that position, standing inside the ocean his government was arguing was being used to erase his country, he delivered Tuvalu's official address to the COP26 climate conference. The image went everywhere, every major news platform, every social media feed. People called it powerful, haunting, a stark reminder, a wake-up call. The conference continued. The commitments made in Glasgow have since been assessed by independent climate researchers as insufficient to prevent the warming trajectories that make Tuvalu's long-term physical survival increasingly difficult to project optimistically. But what Simon Kofe was doing in that water, the part almost every piece of commentary missed, was not simply making a visual argument about sea level rise. He was demonstrating what accountability looks like when it has no enforcement mechanism. Tuvalu has a seat at the United Nations. It has the right to speak. What it does not have is any legally binding instrument that compels the nations responsible to pay for what they have done or to stop doing it. You can be entirely right. Your country can be actively dying from something you did not cause, and the nations responsible can attend every conference, make every speech, sign every non-binding declaration, and then fly home to their infrastructure. That is not a flaw in the system. That is the system working exactly as the people who built it intended. On November 9, 2023, on the sidelines of the Pacific Islands Forum in the Cook Islands, Tuvalu's Prime Minister, Kausia Natano, sat across the table from Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Together, they signed the Falipili Union Treaty. The name requires explanation. Falipili is a Tuvaluan word. It describes the relationship between neighbors, the obligation to care for those beside you, the duty of proximity, the responsibility that comes with sharing the same geography. Australia chose that word deliberately. It framed the agreement as an act of care, of partnership, of mutual obligation, of neighborly responsibility. What the treaty actually contains is considerably more complicated than that language suggests. On the Tuvaluan side, the agreement delivered three things the government had been seeking for years. First, Australia formally recognized that Tuvalu remains a sovereign state, regardless of what happens to its physical territory. Even if the islands disappear beneath the ocean, Australia committed to recognizing Tuvalu as a nation under international law. Second, a special mobility pathway allowing Tuvaluan citizens to live, work, and study in Australia, with access to healthcare, and the Australian social security system. Third, a formal Australian commitment to support climate resilience, including land reclamation engineering, designed to physically raise the elevation of inhabited parts of Tuvalu. On paper, this is generosity. The headlines called it generosity. The photographs showed a handshake. The official statements spoke of partnership, solidarity, the bonds between Pacific peoples. And then there was Article 3. Article 3, the clause that received remarkably little sustained attention outside specialist reporting, states that Tuvalu agreed it would not enter into any security or defense arrangement with any third party without Australia's prior agreement. Not consultation, not notification. Prior agreement. A sovereign nation facing the documented loss of its own physical territory accepted a limit on part of its sovereign decision-making authority in exchange for migration pathways and a promise of climate assistance. The right to choose its own security partners effectively conditioned on the approval of one of the world's highest per capita carbon emitters. Former Prime Minister Enele Sopoaga, who led Tuvalu before Natano, argued publicly that his country had conceded too much, that the security clause represented a fundamental compromise of the very sovereignty the treaty simultaneously claimed to preserve. His concerns were reported. Briefly, they did not change the outcome. The treaty is now in force. To understand why Article 3 matters beyond Tuvalu, beyond 11,000 people living on disappearing coral, you have to understand what Australia was securing with that clause. The Pacific Ocean is not simply a body of water. It is one of the most strategically contested regions on Earth in the early 21st century. China has spent the past 2 decades systematically expanding its diplomatic and security relationships across Pacific Island nations, relationships that create influence over shipping lanes, submarine communication cables, and military positioning between Asia and the Americas. Then, in 2022, the Solomon Islands signed a security agreement with China. That agreement immediately alarmed Australia, the United States, and their regional allies, because they understood exactly what a permanent Chinese security presence in the Pacific could mean. Tuvalu sits directly inside that strategic contest. Its exclusive economic zone, the maritime territory it controls under international law, covers nearly 900,000 square kilometers of the Central Pacific. That ocean contains some of the world's richest tuna fisheries, critical maritime routes, submarine geography of significant military importance, coordinates that matter to every nation seeking influence across the Pacific. So when Australia guaranteed Tuvalu's statehood, offered migration pathways, and promised climate assistance while receiving, in return, effective control over future security partnerships, it was doing more than helping a vulnerable neighbor. It was closing a door, the same door the Solomon Islands had opened to China just 1 year earlier. Subscribe to Hidden Terrains because the stories that reshape how you understand the world never make the front page. This one almost did not either. Now strip away the treaties, the climate reports, the EPCC assessments, the diplomatic language, the legal arguments, the conference rooms. Strip away everything. What remains are people. Dawn on Funafuti does not arrive with an alarm clock. It arrives with the sound of waves, seabirds, and a tide that has kept the same rhythm for 3,000 years. A woman wakes before sunrise and checks the rainwater tank beside her home, not out of routine, out of necessity. Tuvalu has no rivers, no streams, no natural fresh water. Every drop her family drinks, cooks with, or washes in depends entirely on what the sky provided and what the tank managed to save. Behind the houses, small kitchens begin to glow with charcoal. Coconut is grated by hand into a wooden bowl. Breadfruit sits over the embers until its skin blackens and the flesh inside turns soft, gold, and nutty. The smell of smoke and salt air moves down the same coral sand paths it has moved down for generations. Her children walk to school along a road that floods during king tides, not occasionally, regularly, predictably. The flooding has become part of daily life, not an emergency, a routine, something everyone plans around. The school teaches Tuvaluan alongside English, because the teachers understand something most educators never have to consider. The language may outlive the land that created it. The words for the color of the lagoon at low tide, the words for the wind that tells fishermen where tomorrow's catch will be, the words that carry 3,000 years of knowledge. One day, those words may exist only in the voices of people standing on someone else's land. In the evenings, when there is a reason to gather, the community moves toward the Funafuti, a meeting hall with no podium, no distance between speaker and audience. People sit together on woven mats. Disputes are settled there. Visitors are welcomed there. Decisions are not handed down. They are reached. When the drums start, the fatale begins clapping, singing, and movement building in intensity together, each song carrying a fragment of the island's own history, the sea, the ancestors, events the community has chosen not to let disappear. It is not unusual to see a woman wearing a flower garland on her way to the market, or a child with flowers in her hair walking to school. No ceremony requires it. It has simply never stopped being how people express pride in where they are from. In the afternoons, when the tide and the heat allow it, the sound of a bat striking a ball carries across the island. Kilikiti, a game descended from cricket, reshaped by Polynesian rhythm into something closer to a gathering than a competition. Children chase the ball. Elders sit in the shade of the coconut palms and comment on every play. The runway at Funafuti International Airport has no permanent fence. When no aircraft is arriving, which is most of the time, it becomes a road, a football field, a playground, a running track. Children play rugby on the same pavement international aircraft use to land. When the warning siren sounds, everyone steps aside. The plane lands, then life resumes. In a country with only 26 square kilometers of land space, cannot belong to only one purpose. Everything is shared, everything is reused, everything matters. There is one bank in the entire country, the National Bank of Tuvalu, in Funafuti. For most of the nation's history, conducting a transaction meant traveling to that single branch, waiting in line, and leaving with cash. There is a detention facility on Funafuti that operates on a principle that would be impossible almost anywhere else on Earth. Prisoners leave during the day to work and return voluntarily at night. Escape is theoretically possible. It is also meaningless. The ocean surrounding this nation is a more complete barrier than any wall any government could build. The geography enforces what the institution cannot. These are not charming anecdotes. They are the texture of life shaped by absolute constraint, by the specific conditions of existing on a fragment of coral in the middle of the world's largest ocean, with limited resources, limited space, and unlimited resilience. The people of Tuvalu understood something long before governments signed treaties. The most valuable thing they possess is not the land. It is everything the land has taught them. In 2023, the government of Tuvalu formally announced the Digital Nation Project. Every government document, every land record, every cultural archive, every legal instrument of statehood being systematically transferred into secure digital infrastructure that exists independently of any physical territory. The government's reasoning was remarkably simple. If the land disappears, the nation must not. Human civilization has never seen anything quite like this. a government preparing its own continuation before the physical disappearance of its territory, building the legal, political, and cultural architecture of a nation that could continue to exist in cyberspace with a seat at the United Nations, with recognized sovereignty, with an exclusive economic zone covering nearly 900,000 square kilometers of ocean from servers that require no land to exist. There is something else. Tuvalu owns the internet country code .tv, 2 letters, assigned by the global domain system as Tuvalu's digital territory. Since the late 1990s, Tuvalu has licensed the commercial use of that domain. Every broadcaster, every streaming platform, every media company using a .tv address helps generate revenue for the government of Tuvalu, approximately 10 to 15 million United States dollars every year, from a nation whose entire economy sits at around $60 million. One of the world's smallest countries was handed 2 letters the global media industry desperately wanted, and it transformed those 2 letters into a revenue stream that funds a significant share of its public services. A nation that cannot grow enough food in its own soil, that creates its own drinking water from the sky above it, that earns national income from 2 letters of the internet alphabet, and is now uploading its own legal identity into the cloud. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know exactly how far these hidden stories are reaching. Comment below, buried, if you had never heard any of this framed this way before, because most people watching this never will. Every investigation eventually arrives at one question. This is ours. If the physical islands of Tuvalu disappear beneath the ocean, does Tuvalu remain a sovereign state? Under the 1933 Montevideo Convention, the foundational document of modern international law on statehood, a state requires 4 things to exist: a permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and the capacity to enter into relations with other states. Territory. The entire legal architecture of sovereignty, as the world has constructed it across the last century, assumes that a nation occupies physical ground, that the borders on the map correspond to something you can stand on. Tuvalu is the first nation in recorded history to face the genuine possibility of losing that assumption entirely, not through war, not through annexation, not through any act of human aggression, but through the slow, documented, mathematically predictable consequence of decisions made in other countries' industrial heartlands. And the answer to what happens next has consequences that extend far beyond the 11,000 people directly affected. Because if Tuvalu loses its physical territory, but retains its legal statehood, as the Falepili Treaty with Australia explicitly promises, then it also retains its exclusive economic zone, nearly 900,000 square kilometers of Pacific Ocean, legally recognized under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea as Tuvalu's sovereign maritime territory. That ocean does not disappear when the land does. The tuna grounds remain. The submarine cable corridors remain. The strategic positioning coordinates remain. The legal jurisdiction held by a nation that exists as data on a server remains. Who controls that ocean? That question has not been seriously pressed in any public international forum, and the nations with the most to gain from the answer remaining unclear are the same nations whose emissions created the situation in the first place. The timing, again, is not coincidental. We began this investigation with a government uploading its country into the cloud. Now we can understand what that image actually means. It is not a story of technological ingenuity. It is not an inspiring story of digital innovation. It is the most precise measurement imaginable of how completely the international community failed a people who did nothing to deserve what is happening to them. The Digital Nation Project is not hope wrapped in modern technology. It is a government's formal acknowledgement that every international system designed to prevent the erasure of nations like this failed. The resolutions, the conferences, the speeches delivered standing in rising water, the advisory opinions, the bilateral treaties, none of them changed the physical trajectory of these 9 islands. Former Prime Minister Enele Sopoaga stood before the United Nations General Assembly and said words that every person in that chamber heard, and that the institutional response to Tuvalu has since proven largely hollow. He said that what was at stake was not only his nation's survival, but the question of what kind of world the international community was choosing to build, whether the rules it had written to govern itself would be applied equally to the most vulnerable, or only to those powerful enough to enforce them. That question has been answered, not in any declaration, not in any treaty, in the daily reality of 11,000 people checking rainwater tanks, walking flooded roads, teaching their children words for a landscape that is being taken from them by forces they did not create and cannot stop. The ocean is not the villain of this story. The decisions were. And the most unresolved truth this investigation leaves us with is this. The digital nation Tuvalu is building is not a plan for survival. It is evidence. Evidence that a people lived here, built something worth preserving, and were failed by a world that possessed the knowledge, the resources, and the opportunity to act, yet chose, again and again, to watch instead. One day, the physical islands may disappear beneath the Pacific, but if that day comes, the first version of Tuvalu that survives may not exist on land. It may exist on a server. Subscribe to Hidden Terrains, because the stories that matter most are often the ones the world notices too late.